Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm your host Faiza Naqvi in your own program Meri Pehchan, in which and I hope and pray that you all are doing well by the grace of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala and would be doing great in your lives. May Allah protect you all from all the worldly evils and keep you all safe, healthy, and protected by all means. Today, the topic we are about to discuss is very important discussion regarding civilization, which has been proposed by Rehbar Muazzam Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei in past few years, and we will try to see what are the objectives of that Islamic civilization, how it is different from the Western civilization, and what kind of progress would we make as as people who would be following that civilization. So on this topic we have a very special guest to discuss about, and we will move forward to our discuss and see what he would explain about it. And we have Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, who is journalist and anchor and mashallah a great analyst regarding current affairs. Assalamu alaikum Mohsin bhai, I'm really grateful and honored to have you on the show, and really thankful for your time that you took for us. And first of all, Mohsin bhai, I would like to ask you which book you have chosen in order to give a book review for our audience. And welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Not everybody is as keen as you to hear my views often, but I'm very honoured to be on Hidayat TV and to share, I think, what are going to be some very interesting and very, very crucial kind of, if you like, visionary and futuristic thoughts and ideas. So the book review that I'm going to do is kind of linked to this, and it's linked to the kind of theme of the main topic as well. And it's rather than a book, it's a journal, and it's a very powerful journal, which in a way was my own introduction to the next level of Islamic civilizational thinking, or contemporary Islamic civilizational thinking, and it's called Al-Tawheed. You can find it now pretty much listed, most of a lot of the documents, a lot of the kind of articles and essays that were written in Al-Tawheed are now on alislam.org. So anybody who wants to access these, I'd recommend go straight to alislam.org and you'll be able to dig them up. Otherwise, I think you can order them from Tehran or from Qom, or perhaps even some of the Islamic libraries here that exist, or some of the bookshops that exist here. You could try asking the Islamic Centre of England for pointers as to where you might be able to pick it up here. But the reason I picked Al-Tawheed, one, is because on a personal level it's shaped my own Islamic thinking, the revolutionary thinking, my ideas on justice. They're very much rooted in the extended conversations that existed in this book, or this journal rather. And what I liked about it at the time was you get books which in a way make you ultimately have to read pages and pages, hundreds and hundreds of pages, or maybe several hundred pages as well. Whereas what the journal was a very quite a kind of a unique way of dipping into topics without having to read reams and reams of information, but you would get very concise summaries of what that topic was. And so it would whet your appetite, if you like, to go and do more research, perhaps. So it was a great way of introducing you and summarizing Islamic thought in a contemporary way, but for you to, as a reader, digest them quickly, and also therefore get an overview, because really one of the biggest things in Islam is having context and overview very rapidly, for you to be able to really make sense of things. And they say, wisdom, the definition of wisdom as well, is often quoted as being the ability to understand the place of things, the correct place of things. So how can you understand the true place of things unless you have quite a diverse overview of knowledge as a whole? You could be a physicist, for instance, know nothing about philosophy or know nothing about literature, and therefore that leaves you incomplete. But if you had an overview of all of these things, it gives you a grounding of where everything belongs. And then when you go into your detailed readings of physics or biology or I don't know, quantum physics or whatever it is you're into, then it has a place within a context. And the context which Al-Tawhid gave was an Islamic context to a variety of topics. I mean, one of the ones that I'm going to quote here that I've noted is the Islamic Revolution of 1920 in Iraq. And it was, I think it was translated by somebody called Batul Isfahani. And there was an editorial about Muharram, Western nationalism and Islamic nationhood. There was an essay on the role of reason in ijtihad. There was a meeting with Imam Khomeini, Ashura, misrepresentations and distortions. So you can see, you know, even a study of Sunni and Shia traditions concerning tahrif. And it discussed these kind of vastly differing kind of, you know, topics, which was really quite eye-opening and really very useful indeed. And having read not all of those journals, but certainly many of them, it gave me a kind of a confidence to sort of understand that there is the context of Islamic views and thoughts that we have. So that's my recommendation. And people like Ayatollah Murtada Mutahiri, Hamid Algar, you had other people like Wahid Akhtar, Dr. Wahid Akhtar, you had Sunni and Shia thinkers and writers that contributed to this. So that was another aspect to it. It wasn't necessarily just sort of one sect or one perspective. It allowed you to think from different perspectives. In fact, Ayatollah Mutahiri wrote one essay about the 5 schools of thought and their interpretation of what Islam and marriage is, or the rights of, or the kind of the Shari aspects of marriage. From 5 schools, so the 4 Sunni schools of thought, and also of course the Jafri school of thought. I found this was a really good way of operating, because the other thing that we often do is we want to have our religion given to us as a pill that we swallow and we just digest and make no inquiry about. Well, that's not the kind of religion that the Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, or the Prophet really promoted, nor did the Quran, quite clearly, because the Quran says, have you not considered? Do you not think? Have you not considered? Do you not, have you not pondered? You know, reflection. Have you reflected? These are all words that are used in the Holy Quran quite consistently. Encouraging inquiry, encouraging critical inquiry, encouraging the use of logic and reason. And I think Al-Tawheed as a magazine stayed true to that tradition and not only presented the truth, but it also presented counter-arguments within those essays. So you actually built up an expertise in being able to rebuff in future, potentially, the arguments of those who wouldn't agree with some of those schools of thinking that were put across within Al-Tawheed. So I would say that journal for me is like invaluable for Muslims as a resource. There are many others, I have no doubt, but I trust the authors and the way that was evolved, you know, very much. I mean, Ayatollah Khomeini's 40 Hadith, for instance, will be a great start for anybody wanting to improve the self. First thing is really knowing yourself and improving yourself and understanding yourself and having a view of the world through yourself is ego-free, which has an Irfani connection or an Islamically grounded base, is the most important thing. Because if you're, and that's why I found the 40 Hadith really fascinating, because they talked about Riyah, they talked about sort of dishonesty within prayer and ritual worship and such things. So they didn't just tell you pray and that's it and suddenly you're going to get to heaven. They actually told you, look, even in prayer, there are kinds of prayer. You can end up having takabbur in prayer. You can end up feeling that you're a mighty grand Muslim just because you happen to worship in that way. Whereas actually the real measure of your Muslimness is really your action, ultimately, of how you behave once you come out of that prayer. And if prayer hasn't taught us these things, certainly this is what 40 Hadith, these are the kind of conversations that happen there. And I think if you get that aspect of it right, then all the other things that you get introduced to, you'll look at them with justice and with balance and with mizan, and you'll look at subjects, topics, issues, life through a much more balanced and Quranic set of eyes, rather than your own eyes only. Your own eyes are bound to mislead you much more than if you're looking through the prism of the Holy Quran and that way. So that's my book review for today.
That's wonderful, and I'm sure viewers will be able to look at this journal, and they would they would gain benefit out from reading that journal and reading those essays which you have talk about. So now moving on to our topic. So I would ask you, like, what is the need of this Islamic civilization in this day and age in which we are living at the moment? I mean, why Ayatollah Rehbar-e Muazzam Ayatollah Khamenei had to share that civilization idea, and what is that come from, and how it is different from today's age and time which we have Western civilization in different forms in different countries, and which is very much admired by especially our people. So how do you see that, and why do you see the need of this civilization and what it is all about?
Yeah, I think as a context, first of all, every age needs a civilizational vision. Unless you have a vision as a civilization or as a society, I don't think that you can really even probably claim that you're a civilization, because if you've not thought about what your order or what the goal or the objectives of a society is, then you're very much on a very sticky wicket, because the direction of that society will be possibly aimless, would have a lot more conflict, would be also more prone to mistakes, more prone to self-destruction, more prone to harm and committing atrocities. So I think that, first of all, Islamic civilization in any era has the same objective as the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, had when he first established Islamic civilization, which was really, first of all, to spread the divine knowledge, and secondly, to deliver selfless service to humanity and to our planet, i.e. to act as khalifas on the earth, to act as the vicegerents on this planet, to look after it and take care of it, and to take care of ourselves as well as others. So I'd say that in that sense, any new Islamic civilization has no new objective other than what the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, gave us. Its details and its form and its substance may change, but its principles and its kind of values and its kind of its usul are perennial. They're infinite. They're really infinite in nature, and they don't change. I think. So the new Islamic civilization, as proposed, I think, by the supreme leader of Iran, Imam Khamenei, it proposed a concept of establishing this new civilization, and it called it the ultimate purpose of the Iranian government, related with the second phase of the revolution, which was introduced by the supreme leader quite recently, and he did it relatively recently, and he started it on the occasion of an Islamic Unity Conference. But its core is really the centrality of Quranic laws at its heart. It's based on collective wisdom or basira, based on that Quranic based, rooted knowledge, if you like. And it's also based in the betterment of the planet as a whole, international relations, intra-Muslim relations, and just generally for the planet as a whole, to achieve a better, future for that civilization. So the reality is that the Islamic Revolution, of course, which took place in 1979, under the auspices of Grand Ayatollah Khomeini, had a certain mission. Most of the mission that Imam Khomeini took part in was really to get rid of Taghut, to get rid of an order or a civilization which was taking certainly the Islamic Republic of Iran into the depths of depravity, immorality, and non-civilization, as I would call it, and to bring it back to a Quranic direction. And in that sense, Imam Khomeini was hugely successful. That in his own lifetime, he managed to achieve that goal. And not only did he achieve it, during the first 10 years of his leadership, of rather like the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, who also ruled for around 10 years after the defeat of the Kuffar in Mecca, the Prophet had 10 years to build his vision of a new Islamic civilization for the Ummah at that time. So in that sense, Iran had an opportunity under Imam Khomeini to try and start creating this. Of course, the West, which is the key opposer, i.e. the elitists in the West, opposed the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the first thing they did was, in those 10 years, they sent in Saddam Hussein to invade Iran after they failed to, hijack the Islamic Revolution for their own neoliberal, proxies like Bani Sadr and others. So they failed, and during that course of that first 10 years, of course, it made it more difficult for Imam Khomeini to kick in with the Islamic, if you like, civilization that he would have wanted to impose or bring forward much faster. Instead, they were focused on defending themselves, surviving, and as a result of the war, the economy was hit hard, and the revolution was jeopardized. They came through that with a strength and with a conviction and with a unity as a result of defending the Islamic Republic, which I think has stood Iran in great stead over the following 4 decades or so up to now, because the Iranian people have been united by that experience, and they were made to understand very quickly that Zionist imperialist powers basically don't have Islamic Republic of Iran's interests at heart. Ayatollah Khamenei has continued that process that Imam Khomeini started, which was to consolidate the notion of an Islamic civilization or a new Islamic civilization. And he's I think, taken it through it's what I would say is the second phase, because Imam Khomeini's was the consolidation phase, the establishment of the possibility of an Islamic civilized society of the 21st century, but of the 20th century rather, leading into the 21st century. But Imam Khamenei has taken that one stage further. So in the second phase, which I describe as being after Imam Khomeini's passing, it was again the idea of consolidation and making sure that foreign forces didn't again manage to disunite Iran, take it off its purpose of achieving an Islamic civilizational reality. And so recently, I think Imam Khamenei has declared he calls it the second phase. I would call it the third phase, which is that now, having consolidated the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I'll go into how it's consolidated its civilizational trajectory just in a moment. He's now declared what he says is the second phase of the Islamic, revolution. But I'd say perhaps the third phase. Not to contradict Mojhed Taqlid, he's clearly knows what he's talking about. I'm breaking it down more in terms of historical, chronological order of things. And I see that the third phase is now not just about defending, it's not just about consolidating, it's about setting an example and going on into the future and leading the world. So acting as a leader of the idea of ideas of what civilization really means, coming onto this platform. And it comes at a time just when neoliberal Western civilization, if you can call it that quite often, is really beset with all sorts of problems, largely created by their own masters, I would hasten to add, but nonetheless problems it has. I mean, we've had COVID, we've had the whole economic collapse prior to that, we've got the economic collapse that's coming up now, we've got the Ukrainian-Russian crisis and going on, and we've got other civilizational, cultural crisis that they're going through in terms of gender and in terms of their, trajectory morally. There are many, many things that are dividing the West more and more, race, faith, religion, gender, class. These things are all emerging in a big way. So just to summarize this first phase, I would say that, proposing this establishment of a new civilization is really just the old prophetic civilization in a form which is recognizable for a 21st century people. Practically, what does that mean? Well, some of it Iran has already done and proven. So, for instance, if we were to take various fields of social, political, economic, and other arenas of life as a civilization, we'd look at, say, Iran's progress in the technological field, the scientific field, the medical field. And in all those fields, you'll see that the Islamic Republic has progressed very, very rapidly. And not only that, it's amongst the leaders in some areas, including military ballistic missile making, including drone technology now, including even, a lot of the genetic, the genetic engineering, if you like, of cells, and whatnot, cloning, these such things. They're very sharp on such issues. That's one side that I can say 100%. There is apparent progress. Okay, statistically, they would argue that there is. I'll give a little caveat to that in a moment as to why I think it's not totally the right measure to just judge civilization based on these kinds of progress. And I'd say that the areas which are obvious that they've also progressed in are self-sufficiency. So feeding their own society, there's been a big progress in that. Economically, in terms of building a self-sufficiency in mining industries and oil refinery, petrol refineries and such things. Again, there's been great progress there, and even in medicine, they are able to produce mostly their own medicines now as well. So I could go on, and even the fields of education, you can see that women have come through universities in a massive way there, huge way, and there's been a huge explosion of universities, and very high quality universities in Iran too. I could also point to, say, the Islamic Republic of Iran's commitment to fighting for the oppressed in the region, at least where they can reach. So I could point to Yemen, I could point to Syria, I could point to places like Palestine, Lebanon, wherever they've intervened to help an oppressed people, they've been hugely successful, and they've empowered the oppressed to react to the oppressors. Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Anglo-Zionist Empire, the Americans, all these guys. Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, is and has been the primary, if you like, bulwark against imperialist oppression. Absolutely no doubt about that. They are the only Islamic nation who does that. So there's my summary of some of what we would say civilization is progress. Of course, there's more to discuss.
So, Muslim, I want to know, the way you have expressed about, Islamic Republic of Islam and the Western civilization, they are obviously coming across, and they are kind of in a battlefield if we look at it critically. So how do you think, what are the tools Islamic Republic of Iran or this civilization is adopting in order to spread this civilization, and does it have the boundaries or limits to just Iran, or it is something beyond that? And how do you see that, and how do you see that are they going to invade places like colonialism has done around the globe? They took over the resources and things like that. Obviously you mentioned some examples of empowering oppressed countries like Yemen, Syria, by support given by the Iran, but how do you see it in a more broader context, and how do you see what exact tools they are using? What are the parameters of this civilization, if we pinpoint them, this is something, these are 4, 5, 6 principles they are following, and how we can aid that as a Muslim or people who are following rebel, and how should we react to that, and how should we support in that sense as well?
Well, I think I could probably summarize those principles in one word and then break it down a little bit more perhaps, but justice is the word, really. At the heart of everything that Imam Khamenei talks about in terms of the new Islamic civilization, my interpretation is that at the heart of it is justice and love with compassion. So the thing is, this is the teaching of the Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them. This is the way they've taught us how to behave. And even when they're in leadership, and of course, we've got examples of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, Imam Hassan alayhi salam, very briefly, who all acted as clear leaders of very large, if you like, civilizations or society. They had a large entity or to manage. Imam Hussein al-Islam had a smaller circle, but an exceedingly powerful example that he leaves in Karbala about what leadership is and what a civilization is meant to be, because Karbala itself, in terms of his family and his companions, represents an entire civilizational reality in itself, based on justice and based on every aspect and principle that the Holy Prophet outlined as per the Holy Quran in his own lifetime. So you can find lots of ways of looking at how this justice it manifests itself in different forms within the Imam Masameen and under the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. But at the heart of all of it is, I think, justice, love, compassion. These are three, I think, persistent moral virtues, if you like, which are there. And if you add wisdom to those, kind of divinely rooted wisdom, which is ego-free and which looks in a balanced way to see how it can enhance human beings with I think, in harmony with the fitra, the human fitra, the divinely given human fitra. And this is the fundamental difference between the Islamic civilization, old or new, and other civilizations. Because what any new Islamic civilization or old Islamic civilization that was genuine would want is to root itself within the values and the principles of ethics and morality that is laid down in the Holy Quran. Now, those moral, ethical virtues were lived by, of course, the prophets. Every prophet, they were lived by the Imam Masameen, and we all know them: compassion, love, kindness, justice, mercy, all of these kinds of virtues. These are at the heart of the new Islamic civilization. So it doesn't matter whether you're a scientist or whether you're a soldier, you have to operate by these civilizational values. So if you're going to make, if you're going to advance in nuclear energy, then, as Imam Khamenei has said, you've got to think about, well, why am I doing this? What is the moral purpose behind my search for nuclear energy? Is it that I want to search for nuclear energy so I can dominate people or kill people or use it as a weapon? Or is it because I want to use it as something, as a betterment for society? Now, the fatwa by Imam Khamenei makes it very clear on that particular example that nuclear energy, as far as the Islamic Republic of Iran searches for it, is entirely for the energy purposes and for the protection and the defense of the Iranian and the Islamic civilization. Look at their adversaries, and you'll see that that America creates the nuclear bomb in order to test it on Japanese cities, in order to scare the world into being obedient to whatever system that they wanted to come with. That was an intention. They did that. Ostensibly, they'd say, "Oh, we wanted to stop a war, therefore we bombed Japan." But I mean, we know that that's a nonsense. The reality is that Japan was defeated by that time, and it could have been defeated without recourses. They could have dropped the bomb on an empty area somewhere in the sea, just to show them they could do it. They didn't need to drop it on hundreds of thousands of human beings, innocent children, men, women, dogs, cats, whatever. You see the difference here, that the Islamic civilization would take offense, would take it absolutely as barbaric to issue the destruction of innocent civilians in that circumstance. They wouldn't do it. It just wouldn't be done. Therein lies the difference between those who would follow an Islamic civilization and a lot of the other so-called civilizations. They would not put morality underneath economics or power acquisition. They would always put their morality and their ethics and those values of love, compassion, kindness, all of those things, they would put them first, and they would relegate the other aspects of worldly greed and materialism and such things into the background, and they would sacrifice even though they may benefit from them, enrich them, they will still sacrifice them because it's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. Again, it's wrong because the Holy Quran tells us it's wrong. The Prophet tells us it's wrong, and our Deen tells us it's wrong. We don't go against that. So this is why I say, the ideas of the human fitra, divine, basing our policies on divine ethics and morality, is what I think stands us apart from other civilizations. And Ayatollah Khamenei is very much, I think, along these lines. I could give lots of examples, but I'll knock it back to you, and maybe you want to ask something supplementary to that.
But here is one question from your discussion which I have in my mind. Like, when we see our people, like from India, Pakistan, or any Muslim countries, we see like, okay, in West, there are more values and ethical values and this and that, and they are like kind of inspired by these values we see around us in the society. But here in your discussion, I mean, obviously you are saying like, obviously these are not the exact values they are following in a practical sense. So how do you see this difference? Like, if I am not wrong, these are the kind of values they are using to run their industries and things like that, and to promote their systems, but we take it as like huge moral values they have for us, like because we have a voice and we can project our deen, and we can like live in a society with different shades, colors, and race and religion. And even if somebody from other race, color, and religion come, for example, in our countries, they won't have that much respect and kind of protection and all that. So how do you see that mindset which always admire the Western culture and Western values from the people, Muslim people especially, and they always see like if Iran has, or like Rebbe Muslim or Ayatollah Khamenei has said something, they take it like this is some kind of Irani revolution, this is some kind of Irani values, this is some kind of Irani republic, it's not the Islamic. So there is a mindset in our own people who are always rejecting and opposing and seeing like those values like in some kind of like opposition or something like that. So how do you see that, and how would you bring a difference in that? Like, how would you suggest that difference? What is that, and how they can address to that difference which they are unable to see at the moment in these values and things?
Okay, so two or three issues. I mean, the first one I'll address is people's perceptions of the Anglo-Western delivery of morality and ethics in their policies and as a civilization. Yeah. The other aspect is Muslim societies and their implementation of the dream, or the civilizational dream that I outlined a little earlier. So both of them are flawed. I don't defend Muslim nations by and large and their delivery of what I would see as a Quranic, fitra-based Islamic civilization. I don't believe them to have done that very often, even in their history, in the way that the Imam Masumin or the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, would have liked or would have aspired to. I believe that the Western civilization has quite clearly not done it. Whilst I've lived in the West and I've grown up in the West, so I have every right to analyze and be critical, I guess, based on watching as an analyst, as a journalist, as somebody who's grown up here. The truth is that we have the veneer of a moral and ethical system. And the moral and ethical system has boundaries. It has very subtle boundaries in the West. In the East, they're much more crude about the way they handle those boundaries. That's the only difference. So in the West, you'll get most of those boundaries and those limitations to freedom of speech, to the freedom of expression of your religion, or the freedom of or the right to justice in society in the full sense of the word. You'll see that those restrictions are much more subtle, and they're couched in very interesting language. But nonetheless, those freedoms are curtailed very, very regularly, and they're curtailed when it's not in the interest of the financially elite power fraternity. Examples of this abound. For instance, if you went into the City of London, let me just give you an example, in case people think I'm just making it up. The Corporation of London, for instance, the City of London, is operated completely separately from the mainstream British lands, and yet most people don't even know that. They have their own police force, they have their own kind of jurisdiction over that plot of land. And what goes on in that Corporation of London, in our same, I pick London as an example because that's what I know best, although this exists also in Wall Street and other places. You find that there is a complete no-go zone, legally speaking, to actually get into the City of London and to judge it based on morality and ethics that the government, British government, know about, for instance. So, for instance, when the Saudis were investigated for their role in terrorism over the last 20 years, every time that the banks were requested to show the accounts, the money trails that showed that the Saudis and actually the British themselves were involved in creating the likes of ISIS and whatnot, there was no possibility. They weren't able to access any of those accounts. They weren't able to investigate the Saudi government. Even the report that the UK government produced about the Saudis' role in that kind of terrorism has been quashed, and to this day they won't let you see it. You can't see it. There's just one example of a very subtle form of corruption, but a corruption which is absolutely phenomenal in its impact. I mean, the result of that corruption is that hundreds of thousands of people are being killed. An entire war on terror was declared in which millions were killed and displaced, and yet there's no accountability, and we can't go and find that root cause. That's happening in England, not in Pakistan, not in Iran. That scale of corruption, and I just give that as one, shocking example. I could go further into gender fluidity and the way that we're dealing with children and paedophilia, and how paedophilia was covered up with Jimmy Savile and with other people in high places in government. Let's open up that paedophile bag of goodies or bag of nasty realities, Prince Andrew and all of this kind of business. You can see that there's a glass ceiling. In certain times, at certain places, the establishment can quite easily create corruption and impose its own rule as and when it likes, when they want to do this, okay? Racism aplenty in the West, in Europe, is quite clearly Islamophobic and racist on a level which is unbelievable. Yes, racism exists in the Pakistan, but it's not institutional. It's not systemic. Might exist in ordinary people, and people have bad attitudes and sort of un-Islamic attitudes, and that's not allowed at all either. But when you have systemic racism, systemic corruption, well, systemic corruption exists in places like Muslim countries as well as here, because the economic political system, which is creating the civilizations these days, or engineering civilization, is fundamentally corrupt, and it wants corrupt systems. It wants systems that will fail quite often, and sometimes it necessitates their failure. For instance, the IMF will impose such interest on loans which poor countries can't pay back, and they know the result of that will be poverty, hunger, death, and subjugation of that nation, yet that's why they do it. So again, corruption by Western institutions, the UN, the WHO, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements, or banking havens that they have in various islands that Britain owns or whatever as its former colonies, that hide all the money, hide all the wealth of the world, which is sucked from poor people, and the commons that's sucked from poor people and then stashed away in dark Swiss bank accounts that nobody can access. Where's that corruption coming from? You see my point, that the real corruption at the highest level that really is causing most of the rest of the obvious corruption, the corruption of a thief on the ground having to go and rob to feed his hungry child. I mean, there's scales of corruption. You might find one person who does it as what we would call majburi, and is forced to do it because of hunger, and there are other people as a profession, and then there are others who do it because systemically they're right at the top creating the corruption. So I would say Islamic civilization opposes those at the top who create corruption and fitna in the land most. And Ayatollah Khomeini said this very clearly. That was his term, Great Satan and the Little Satan. What was he talking about? He was talking about the banking and the kind of the economic and political corruption that was there at the heart of America and Britain, which symbolized the Anglo-Zionist empire. And why did he turn on Israel again? Because another manifestation of the zulm and the injustice of that corrupt system. So I would say Iran, and the third factor I was going to mention to you was obviously the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, let's get it straight. Ayatollah Khamenei is not saying I have created a new Islamic civilization. He's saying I am aspiring to build a new Islamic civilization. He's saying Iran has to move towards a new Islamic civilization. So there he's telling you that at the moment, even with the Islamic Republic itself, there are many, many people who need to get with the program and get to understand what Islam requires and what real Islamic civilization is. So, for instance, some people might say, oh, why do we wear hijab? And they might rebel against that secretly. At home, they don't abide by any of the rules, but outside they might come and abide. And you can see that they abide by them, but you can see that there's a resistance to wisdom and to the natural order that Islam gives, because they say we know better. We think that women should mix freely with men and it's fine and it's okay, and what is all this business of separating men from women, and this is repressive and whatnot. And they have their arguments which come from the neoliberal West, and they want freedom, and they say that this new Islamic civilization is preventing our freedom. But of course there's not a logical discourse, there's not a full-on evidence-based, statistically rooted factual discourse around such issues. It's just emotions. So if we were to say, okay, when free mixing does occur between men and women in a civilization like the West, what are the results? What do we find emerging? Is there a greater number of bastards, for instance, or illegitimate children? Are there a greater number of relationship breakups within that system? Are there consequences for children as a result of all those broken marriages or whatever, or the societal ill, or the freedoms that are given in terms of do what you like, have moral relativism, and go and experiment and do this and that. All of the relationship hurt, damage, traumas. Who's responsible for that later on in life when those things kick into people or leave people mentally totally traumatized for life? You see, there are consequences to human action, which Western civilization or other non-Islamic civilizations do not look at objectively and do not want to look at the statistics and won't tell you the statistics when it suits them. All they'll say to you is, oh, equal rights. Oh, equal rights. It's got to be equal rights. Well, there's no such thing as equality. My 5 fingers are not equal. In society, nobody's fingerprint is equal or the same. No 2 people are the same. Everybody has a difference. So equity I can understand. Equality I don't understand. I don't understand what equality means. I understand equity, that we act in a balanced way to look at individual circumstances and to try to help them, to raise them up and give them a fair chance in life. Equality is a nonsense. I don't get what do you mean by equality? What equality? Will you find that women are going to be the same strength as men, or all men are going to be equal strength, or, it's not possible, is it? You can't create that kind of equality.
But we didn't find that equality in the Ukraine war when they sent out all the men's and young boys in the war and left the women and children. They sent back to them. So they didn't show that as well. So I would like to ask you, like, where do you see these values going? Like the one Aga Khamenei has suggested us to work upon, and how important for our society, especially the Muslim society, need to understand and connect themselves with these values and project them. How important is that projection? How important is that understanding for us as a Muslim to come out of that kind of, you can say, propagation which has been done by the West? Like, they think like we are in politics and we are doing this and we have all the opportunities over here and this and that. So how come we can break that shell, and how can we empower our youngsters, our people, to project these values, the one which has been projected by or proposed by Ayatollah Khamenei, and what is responsibility we have as a follower of Ahlul Bayt regarding our Naib of Imam and all that. So how do you see that? Because we are just left with last 10 to 12 minutes, so I would like to know what do you suggest, like as an analyst, and how do you see all that, and what are the most important things we as a nation, as a people who especially the people who are Shias of Ahlul Bayt, so what is their responsibility in that regard, and what step they should take in that regard, and this civilization, how does it work around the globe, how important is for us to connect with our like Rebremoism and the kind of suggestions or advices he gives us, so how important is that, how do you see that? So I would like to know about it.
First of all, the wisest person, as I said earlier, is the one who is able to put everything in its correct place. Now, amongst the Ahl Tashayyu, amongst the Marja Taqleed even of the Ahl Tashayyu, and amongst this fraternity, we would argue that of all the religions, of all the schools of thought, this is the most senior, because it roots itself in the divine, and it roots itself in Prophet, and it roots itself in the Holy Ahlul Bayt, and we are followers of Imam Mahdi Akhir Zaman, and we therefore are the most likely to be guided absolutely to where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants humanity to be. So firstly, given that that's my position that I come from, I would say that Ayatollah Khamenei of all the marjas is the wisest, because he has access to a nation and resources. He has access to a secret intelligence service. He has access to a military. He has access to scientists. He has access to medical doctors. He has access to psychologists of the highest caliber. Those people all answer to his leadership, putting efforts into his establishment, his government, to create this new Islamic civilization. Now, the best of them, they also understand Islam, and they understand the moral values, and are working towards this new Islamic civilization because they believe they want to help humanity and to serve humanity as a whole, not just the Iranian people. So the Islamic Revolution was never for Iran. I don't call it the Iranian Revolution. I call it the Islamic Revolution for a reason. An Islamic Revolution is for all humanity. It's not for one nation, one tribe, one people, first of all. So therefore, Ayatollah Khamenei, being the wisest, and he's the wisest because he has access to the most information, and he also has knowledge of the divine book and the prophetic character. So therefore, and of course, he has access to the other Urafa, Ulama, and all the other great marjas. So imagine all the wealth and the combination of all that intellectual, spiritual, economic, cultural know-how and knowledge, and it's all centered in this man. That's an extraordinarily powerful place to be as far as I'm concerned, and that gives us the first source of our knowledge base. So we as people who are followers, first of all, we are obligated to do what I said at the beginning of the program, and go and read and learn, and to have train ourselves in critical thinking and logic in order to be able to come up with rational solutions. And at the same time, we have to understand the divine and the metaphysical, and to be understand the context even of logic and rationality in this realm. You have to understand the bigger realm as well, because there are things beyond rationality and logic too. There's intuition, there's ilham, there's wahi, there are all these things as well. And there is a world beyond this which interacts with us that we know of too. Imam Mahdi alayhi salam is one of those. He's existing here, and he's also part of our process of revolution and renaissance, if you like. So I would say that first of all, knowledge, acquisition of knowledge ourselves, ability to think critically, and going to the correct leadership who has also then give us advice about all of this knowledge, so we can add our knowledge and our critical thinking, but actually frame it within the wisdom of this new Islamic civilization led by the movement that's spearheaded by Imam Khamenei. So I would say those things, first of all, give us a great base. Because if you go and actually just go on the website of, say, for instance, Imam Khamenei today, you'll see the articles, how to decrease countries' defense strength so that the enemy won't become sensitive, is unintelligent. It's a whole discourse by Imam. You've got a discussion on environmental protection being the most fundamental and essential task in the country. So he discusses that. And he's got the US, basically a mafia regime that creates crisis in the world and feeds on them. Now, you don't have to blindly follow what the Imam is saying it, but you must read and you must listen to his narrative, being somebody who would say that they're rooted in the Quran, because all his opinions will come from that Quranic base, and his wisdom of everyday issues is going to be very deep. And not all ulama know about these things. Not all ulama are at the same level, you know. But here we have the institution of marja'iyat combined with the institution of walayat faqih, which allows us access to a massive amount of wisdom and knowledge. And I think that first thing is we must go to this source more regularly. Go to Imam Khamenei's website, read it regularly, read the opinions and thoughts in there. Go and read daily papers, read the bad papers as well, read the Anglo-Zionist news, but also read your own and then formulate your own opinions. So this is the way you interact on a daily basis. Be aware, be a thinker, be a critical inquirer, and then ground it within your spirituality. Make sure that you're centered and you're focused on your spirituality, and you don't just act spiritual, like a spiritual person, but actually you behave like one as well, because that will give you God's strength. God will then provide you with the basira and open your heart and open your eyes and open your mind to truth. Whenever you get faced with a choice, Allah will help you to make the right choice. So these are the spiritual inner dimension to knowing truth, but we have practical dimension, which is what Imam Khamenei represents. And he's giving us a vision, and he's also offering you a society. Because if you want to look at Iran under the Shah and compare it to Iran today, you will see all of the things I said. You see that already on the progress towards an Islamic civilization, we've got ethical economics, ethical politics. They're trying those ethical, science. Now they are failing at times too, because I could say, well, is Iran practicing a non-uterus system? Well, not exactly. So there's room for improvement. That's not a criticism, it's just to say there's a progress that needs to be made. Is Iran rejecting the IMF and the corrupt organizations? Yes, they are. But sometimes they go with the WHO, for instance, which is backed by your Bill Gates and your same criminal mafia. So why are they doing that? They were ready to accept Agenda 2030 at one stage, the Iranian government, but Imam Khamenei intruded and stopped them. Why? Because the Agenda 2030, Agenda 21 was all based on trying to force everybody to conform to a new system which the elitists had come up with, and they were using the UN to distribute all these ideas using language, economic sustainability. But you see, what they want to do is to subjugate people, to control people, to take away their freedoms, their rights, and they use these clever little linguistics, and they use these clever terms when they want to create problems between men and women. They'll say we want feminine equality. So you sound, oh great, we want women's equality, but actually what they want is tension between men and women, to create conflict there, to break up systems. They might say we want to educate children, for instance, and give them knowledge, empower all children to have ability to read and write. But then what they give them access to read and write in terms of content is corrupt and anti-Islamic. So you see how when the enemies of Islam or enemies of the human fitra roll out their programs, and those people who are still traumatized by colonialism and what I call neo-colonialists from amongst our people, who often fall for these tricks and these traps all too readily, excusing Anglo-Zionist imperialism as being better than us because it looks shinier and they've got better cars and they've got roads that are good, and there are laws that you have to follow which make you hand out fines and whatnot, and then they go around comparing Eastern countries which are subjugated, looted by the same West, and they sort of look on that as if the West is strong because of itself. No, it's there because it's raping the rest of the world. That's why they have enough money to create systems where you look shinier and better, but actually morally it's far more corrupt. This system here is far more corrupt than anything else in the world that I know. In summary, the Islamic Republic of Iran is an opportunity for us to create that prophetic dream, the Islamic dream of a society, the Prophet's dream of a better world based on values of love, kindness, compassion, and those have to be through all your policies, whether it's your war machines, whether it's your scientists, whether it's your politicians or your economists. They ought to be following these values. And I think that's why I personally back Imam Khamenei, because this is This is the only option to destroying the neoliberal hegemony, which is actually
Yeah.
totally against those values and wants to destroy Islam as well.
Thank you so much, Sayed Mohsin Abbas. I'm really grateful, and it was honor to have you on the show. And it was really insightful discussion you had with us. I'm really grateful for your time, and because we are just running out of time. And to the viewers, I would say, like Mohsin Bhai has suggested all the points and create analysis about the civilization Imam Khamenei, Rebbe Mosem has suggested us. We should read about it, we should think about it, and we should work for it. With this point, I would take a leave, and we'll see you inshallah next week. Allah Hafiz.